Hey everyone, we want to welcome you to the Deeper Dive podcast of Hopevale Church. This is where we take the message from the weekend and we keep the conversation going during the week. I'm Dan Davis, senior pastor here at Hopevale. We're in the Great Lakes Bay region of mid-Michigan. That's Saginaw, Bay City, surrounding communities. And today I'm joined by Paul Miller, our executive pastor at Hopevale. Hey, Paul.
Hey, what's happening?
It's good to be with you behind the mic here today. Yeah. And as we were talking before we jumped on, it's wild to think that yesterday was the conclusion of the campaign, because we've been talking about this general idea. I mean, going back to last year, right?
Yeah, it's been a year that we've been talking about it. I shouldn't say it that way. It's been great.
Yeah.
But it's been a lot, right?
Yeah.
And I would also say, I'm not sure, we're done with the public phase of the pledging process, right? The campaign itself goes all the way through till January of 2024. But I know for us, a lot of the heavy lift was to get to this point.
Yes, definitely. And we will get in details both about the campaign itself and the projects as well. But so I thought I would start, though, because, I don't do this all the time, but kind of told this sports story as part of the message. And Kyle, you lived down in Texas for a long time. And you know what's wild for me as a Midwesterner going to night ball games in Texas? It doesn't cool down.
It's not cold. It's pleasant.
It really is, and it stays warm. It's just the wildest thing. But speaking of warm, you had kind of an opposite sports experience this past weekend, and not just solo, but with some of our colleagues, right?
I did. So I do this thing on the side for fun with Bill Hobson called Church Pew Sports. It's just a pastors talking sports and life podcast.
Yes.
So we took the show on the road this past weekend, and we went to the Big House for the Michigan-Nebraska game. I had never been to a game there, and I had a lot of fun. I'll just say that off the top. I had a lot of fun. It was Bill Hobson and myself and Pete Carlson and Adam Harbaugh, and so we drove down and did the whole tailgate thing, brought the mics with us and just interviewed a bunch of fans from Nebraska and Michigan and just kind of got their perspective on things. And it was fun to remind people that Church Pew Sports meant you had to keep it PG. And so we did all that and just had a fun conversation. And then the game itself was a bit of a snoozer, I have to say. Like, Nebraska didn't really bring anything to make the game interesting. They were down a quarterback or two, I think, and Michigan was clearly a better team. And I think Michigan decided to keep it very vanilla because I think they have their eyes on a game a couple weeks from now. And so I don't think they wanted to put anything on tape. And so it was just Blake Corum every time for 6 yards right up the middle. And after a while, we got to the point where it was like, is it worth sticking that out to the end? Because it was cold. It was really cold.
Well, and Paul, I'm not sure our church family broadly knows where your allegiances lie when it comes to college sports. So, right?
Well, yeah, my wife Bobby's from Ohio.
Okay.
Her whole family grew up Buckeye fans, and so I'm kind of married into, always been a Big Ten guy, right? Born and raised in Chicago, but I married into the Buckeyes deal. And so it was never an issue for me, quite honestly. When we lived over in the west side of Michigan, it was fine to be an Ohio State fan and also root for Michigan and all of that. And then I have this great story when we moved down to Texas. The day we pulled up in front of our house was the day that the Rose Bowl was happening between Texas and Michigan.
Oh.
Like Vince Young.
Okay.
Rose Bowl back then, right?
Oh, my God.
So my neighbor comes knocking on my door and says, "Hey, man, good to meet you. You want to watch the game with us?" Because he saw the Michigan plates. And so I was in his game room with 6 other guys from our street watching that Rose Bowl game. And though I was an Ohio State guy, I didn't tell them that. I was just rooting for Michigan. And, of course, that was a little bit frustrating, that game. But I learned that I have this thing that you can be a Big Ten fan and root for the Big Ten in general, even if you're crossing rivalry lines. And then we moved up here to a little closer to Ann Arbor, and I've realized that maybe that isn't really true for everybody. You cannot do both. And I learned that in spades at the game this past weekend because, of course, Bill Hobson was like, "Did you guys know this guy right here is a Buckeye fan?" And so we were having a lot of fun conversation about that.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've been to the Big House, but I'm sure they haven't expanded the width of the bleachers and how much room you get to sit down, right?
No, no, they were narrow and they were metal and cold, and so we were standing almost the entire time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it is
I was thinking about you guys because literally 2 days before it's 70 degrees.
Yeah.
And
we missed by 48 hours.
Yeah. Wow.
But it was super fun, and I told the guys that I really enjoyed my experience, even though it was 105,000 Michigan fans and 5,000 Nebraska fans. It was still really, really fun, and met some cool folks and had a lot of conversations. So we had a blast.
That's great. So we'll just consider this kind of a crossover promo. That's Church Pew Sports, right?
Yes.
Weekly podcast.
Yeah, you can find it at churchpewsports.com or just go to my Facebook page or Bill Hobson's Facebook page. We're always posting the links whenever we put a new episode out. So,
and it is PG, just
Yes.
like the Deeper Dive. So,
yeah.
well, hey, so let's dive in. And the first word I just kind of have on my notes is impressions, right? Impressions from yesterday, impressions from the overall campaign, and let's just kind of swap some stories.
Yeah, I really, I had a great experience yesterday. I'll start there.
Okay.
I was standing up in the sound booth because I really enjoy the perspective of being able to see and pray. You guys who are on stage, I'll have to sit up front, but I can stand in the back, and so that was really good. And I just had this sense that the Spirit was in the room. That's true every Sunday. What probably wavers is my awareness of it, and my sensitivity to it. And so it was fun to just kind of lean into that and knowing the significance of the day. Just praying for folks as they came in, and I saw folks walking in with their pledge card in hand, so they had clearly prayed and prepared and were ready. And then also watching folks, I think some folks processing in real time as you were teaching.
Oh, interesting.
And just as getting to the point where they were ready to turn in their pledge. And so here's my headline. Like, my overall impression would be, the public phase of this campaign has been 5 weeks. So we did a 5-week series where this is what we were talking about on Sunday morning. And it wasn't just about the campaign, but it was about Hopevale's future and what the Lord is up to and what does it mean to honor him with your finances and in every area. There were all kinds of other things that were part of the conversation, but it was a 5-week series. And I feel like momentum has been building over the 5 weeks. Now, we don't know a number yet, so I don't know. I can't say, okay, the pledge amount that was in everybody's heads cumulatively is bigger over the course of those 5 weeks. But I have to say that the conversations have been better and better and better and better. And the things that people are telling me, coming up to me in the lobby and saying, hey, we've been talking, we've been praying, and here's what the Lord's been doing. And of course, not so much about how much they're going to pledge, but just about this idea of honoring the Lord in all areas of your life, which I think is the subheading for the campaign itself. I mean, it's about the future of the church and everything else, but I feel like I'm just giving you a stream of consciousness here.
No, this is good. No,
But I've had so many conversations with folks who kind of started with, hey, I don't know if I want to come to church for these weeks or for these series because I don't really talk to my spouse about money. Or I certainly don't talk to the Lord about my money, And so I've had this conversation, this idea of like you invite the Lord into your life and you invite him in the front door, and then you go room by room through your house, right? And you invite him into every room in your home, and you say, okay, this is an area of my life I want to talk to you about. How can I let you be Lord of this part of my life, whatever? And it seems like money and finances can often be that closet in the back that you for a long time will just say, okay, well, that's like, can I just have that and not have to submit that part of my life to you as well, Jesus? And so I think that's what's been going on, is really healthy ground being taken just in individuals' lives as they're figuring out what it means to let Jesus be Lord of their finances as well.
God, that's so good. I mean, again, it's funny, right? You talk about the mission statement, know and follow Jesus.
Right.
But it's like, okay, this is like really where it gets personal, right? Yeah, no question.
Yeah.
No question about it. And it's funny, Paul, when you talk about like the discipleship journey, because I think for me, even over these 5 weeks, oh, by the way, you said the number thing, and we're just going to like tease this because we're going to talk about the number and how we find out about the number toward the end of the podcast, right?
Sorry.
So we got so we're gonna
Yeah.
like keep people hanging, right?
Yeah.
And keep them tuned in. But and I think week by week that is really what continued to grab, I think, my heart, and watching people go through this. And it's something even Kathy said last week about just God being honored in the conversations. And I think that that's really true. And again, whether it's our personal conversations with the Lord, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I love. And I think we really try to create that at Hopevale, of just this, you can talk to God about anything. And the Psalms certainly give us permission to be emotional about that. Yeah.
Do you think that people went on the journey that you outlined yesterday, where you were like sad, mad, glad? It almost feels like that's kind of what it's been for people.
Yeah. Well, and I think the sad part, I talked about fear and worry, and that just I think that's kind of been a headline, I think, with the economic climate, right? And then you throw in our news, and all that is mixed in there, and yet
an election with results that people have different opinions on.
Holy smokes, right? And yet it's funny. It's like, I think sometimes we hold this wrong view of like, okay, I'm going to wait for, everything to be good and all the planets to align, then I'll obey God. And it's just life never works that way, right?
Yeah.
And so it's funny because on paper, and I think you and I might have talked about this before, it's like on paper, the timing of this doesn't make sense of why we're doing it. And yet it does. And I was telling one of our elders yesterday, this has been a lot of hard work, a lot of conversations, a lot of prayer. There really, for me, Paul, have been a lot of just unexpected blessings, and I know you too, because you and I have talked, like you seem to, I was going to say lightning rod. I'm not, you seem to be a magnet for a lot of great lobby conversations. Church. And so I'm curious about like, what were some of the things you were hearing, maybe even week by week, and how people are processing this?
Yeah, it really has been the progression. Like at the beginning of the 5 weeks, a lot of the questions were about, okay, tell me how this campaign is going to work and what's the expectation for me? I know Dan just laid it out for us, but can you translate that or help me understand and that kind of stuff? And then at the front end, there was, as you said, a lot also of why are we doing this now? Is this the right time? And a lot of questions about the projects that we're talking about funding. A lot of questions about the Bay City building, where we're at with that, why Bay City in general. I think that was a huge thing for a lot of folks. And I understand that because I think it's roughly 10% of our people at Hopevale are attending weekly in Bay City. So that means 90% of the people have maybe never been up there to see what the Lord's up to and to see firsthand the lives that are changing and everything else. So I get it, right? I get why people would have those questions. And then there are people who are like, well, what's going to change here in Saginaw? How's my experience going to be different with these tech upgrades? And so people had a lot of questions about what the money was going to be raised for, not so much from a position of lack of trust.
Yeah.
But I think it informs their prayer, right? And so that was at the beginning. And then there was, after we got through the first couple of weeks, I noticed that the conversations were turning and people were wanting more to tell me about their process.
Yeah.
And the things that they were praying about. And I know I've had several conversations with folks who have said, I'm going on that journey that you challenge us to go on, from what's reasonable to what might require some reprioritization. And people coming up to me and saying, well, this is what we're reprioritizing, right? This is what the Lord's calling us to do or to change about how we're living so that we can lean in more fully to the campaign, which I love that.
Yeah.
And it's not so much about, that's going to be a bigger pledge, as it is, it's like the Lord is bringing every room in the house under his authority, right? And people are saying, every area of my life, every area of my life, every hour of my week, that whole deal. And then towards the end, the questions became much more about like the specifics of the pledge process, as people were taking very seriously the fact that they were going to write something on a card. And so like I've talked with Greg Gibbs, our consultant, about what's a normal expectation for, like, if this is the total amount pledged, how much of that ends up getting turned in? And Hopevale has shown in its past, and based on the conversations I've had, I think is going to show again, that people don't just frivolously write a number down.
Yes.
They actually
Yes.
take it seriously and pray through it and view that as something that they're consecrating before the Lord, that they're going to do and they're going to work toward. And so that's kind of been the progression, again, of the conversations. And then I had a conversation just yesterday. This woman was standing in the lobby and kind of walked up and said hi, because she was standing by herself and it looked like she wanted to talk, and I didn't know who she was, but she's like, I just want you to know. And she just went on and on about what a privilege it is to be a part of a journey like this, to be a part of Hopevale. Wow. She starts telling me her story, and she was just overflowing with gratitude to Jesus for what he's done in her life. Wow. And as a result, how that has allowed her to be in a place where she can participate in a campaign at her church, where an environment or a place where he has changed her life. Now she's like, I get to be a part of something bigger than myself. I get to be a part of the future of this place. And it had nothing to do with whether or not she was going to pledge or how much she was going to pledge. It was just, I'm in this thing with everybody else, and I'm in it because of how Jesus has changed my life. And she proceeded to tell me about the different environments that her life takes her in, work and family and neighborhood and other things. And she was talking about where she's been sent.
Wow.
All the things, right? And so it was just such an encouraging conversation. And then she looks at me and goes, I've probably talked to you long enough. I'm just going to leave you alone now. And she walks away. And I was like, you ever have those conversations where you're like, okay, if I was going to have like an encounter with an angel that I didn't know it was happening at the time, but I just needed to be encouraged, so the Lord sent someone. That's what that was for me yesterday. It was after the second service. It was super, super encouraging to me.
Yeah. So, yesterday I wanted to just, so I said this in the message, this whole idea of our passage striking me in different ways at different times, kind of like a prism, and I camped on the generation thing. And, Paul, I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's a combination of us winding down our time here. I was standing on stage. I was watching that bumper one more time with all the historical pictures like blowing through. And, then there really was a sense, and I said some of this yesterday, but I flash back. So during this series, while it's going on, we had a trunk or treat with over 1,000 people, feet on ground on our campus in Saginaw. We had the child dedication ceremony 2 weekends ago, and this past weekend we had the students retreat. And it's no coincidence, And then yesterday, you had talked about like the service itself, and then that giving time as we were singing "Do It Again," and I was watching, not watching, singing, not singing, but just watching the different people coming up to give what they gave, right? From couples to children to somebody with mobility assistance, or however you say that, right? And I'm just like, oh my gosh, it just... so honoring. It had to be so honoring to the Lord. And swapped text with Nate this morning, said a similar positive experience in Bay City. And just so good on so many levels. And I love that. I was telling somebody this story after one of the services as well about the generations thing. And I said, I remember my grandmother, very significant person in my life, and as she was getting older, she was attending a church that at one time had a heyday, and it was in the Detroit area. And as the years went on, it grayed out, and they didn't have any younger families, and they kept wondering how they could get young people to their church, and the church eventually died, and and that happens, right? We see that happen elsewhere. And so just to go through something like that, to hear the stories from student retreat, to feel the energy in kids, and it's like such a privilege and such a blessing, right? To think that the work of the Lord is continuing. It's just so cool on so many levels for me.
Yeah, totally. So is it sin to be prideful in the church? Because here's like my buddies from Dallas and from Chicago are like, tell me about Hopevale, and I continually lead with, it's good people.
Yeah.
It's just good people. And there's a rootedness and a groundedness to this part of the state and this part of the country, I think. But Hopevale is just good people. And that was one of the things that I was feeling again yesterday as I was watching the way people were engaging in that exercise, really wanting to honor the Lord in the process. And so there's a whole lot of things about Hopevale that I wish were different. There's a whole lot of things that I wish we could change or work on or whatever. But man, the people, it's a privilege. It's just a privilege to be a part of it. So
yeah.
And I'm not even getting sentimental because I'm like, counting the calendar days to the end of the year, like some people might be, right? I'm just here, just enjoying the opportunity to serve.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So a couple things came to mind, Paul, and we will get to like, where do we go from here? But a couple things came to mind. Last Sunday, we talked about this FAQ sheet 2.0, and, it's a very unglamorous name, but the whole idea was you were kind of the point person, although we were getting a lot of input from staff and elders, like what were people asking? What were people wondering? And are there any kind of nuts and bolts question from that exercise? Yeah. Of course, we know everybody read it, right? No.
Yes.
But seriously, when you think about that, what were a couple of the things that jumped out that you think people are still wondering about?
Yeah, I think, people wanting more information than we gave initially about the actual projects. And so one would be, what does 1.2 million buy us in Bay City? That was kind of a headline. Does that mean, is that just to buy a building? Is that to buy and remodel a building? Will we still have a mortgage in Bay City after the campaign? So the quick answer to those things would be the plan right now is that 1.2 will allow us to purchase and remodel and get ready to go in our permanent home in Bay City, and assuming that the Lord provides through Hopevale the money that we're praying and asking for, then no mortgage on the backside of all of that, potentially a bridge loan kind of deal. But at the end of the season of everyone giving toward their pledges, there should be no mortgage. That was the thing. That was the first thing that people were asking about.
Yeah. And again, we may have talked about this on other podcasts too. I know you've been working with Pastor Nate, and they've got a building team that they're looking for something in the range of around 20,000
square feet is what we need to do Sundays well.
And what would doing Sundays well look like for like an auditorium or kids space or things like that?
That means 250 to 300 seats, with a nice lobby, a place to hang out and do kind of body life community stuff, kids ministry, supporting space for kids ministry. As more and more young families are coming to Hopevale, Saginaw and Bay City, and then some office space and all of those kind of things. So that adds up to that. And then we would need it to be adequately parked. And so those are the things that we're looking for. And the search team, as you said, they're continuing to faithfully.
And it's a hard look, from what I understand. It's really a hard thing to find, right?
It is. There's smaller things in Bay City, smaller like storefront opportunities in different buildings like that. But to be candid, the buildings that are at the 20,000 square foot or bigger number right now are the owners of those spaces so far have had what I would describe as a little bit of an inflated sense of the value of their property. So we trust God with that. He's big enough to handle that, right? But we also faithfully continue to work the process and pray, and that would be by far the biggest thing.
Good. And maybe just for those listening too, for some perspective, I believe our Saginaw campus is 54,000 square feet, right? So obviously the auditorium space is smaller. And here's interesting too. Some people may not know this about you, Paul, but you're part of a national network of executive pastors and talking about the present and the future of church. And like when people hear a space for 250 to 300, they might be wondering, wow, is that too small? Is that too big? What are some of the things you're hearing about that?
Well, it's interesting, that number of like ideal preferred size church kind of thing, that's been coming down for years. And I think COVID just accelerated that in a lot of people's minds. And when multi-site first became a new innovation in the church, the conversation was often about, we need a 1,000-seat auditorium at every one of our locations, right? That number has come down. And so when you think 250 seats, you fill 80% of your seats, most likely do two services. So that allows you to grow the congregation there to a capacity of around 400 people to attend on any given Sunday, which means you probably have double that in the number of people who are saying this is my church home, because not everyone comes to church every Sunday. And so that's really kind of the preferred size now for people. And it actually makes sense to me. Like, I think about when I walk into a really big room, like the Saginaw campus, there can be a sense of anonymity, and for some people that's really appealing, and it's not wrong. It's just you wonder if your friends are there. The room is big enough, and there's enough people walking around. But in a small room where it's 200 seats, 250 seats, you can look around and see who's there, and you can connect with and talk with and notice when someone isn't there that you then can follow up with and say, hey, missed you yesterday, kind of thing, And so that's why I think that what people are preferring more and more, especially post-COVID, when so much of the Sunday church experience can become commoditized or digitized, right? Like I can get my sermon online. I can have any pastor I want, and all those kind of things. What is it that motivates people to come to church? It's personal and it's experiential, right? And so you get this sense of like what we felt in church yesterday, that the Spirit is here. And I'm here, I'm experiencing that with my friends, with my people. And so we want it to be more personal. We want it to be more accessible to people in those ways. And quite honestly, there are things that we can do in a 250-seat room like what they're going to have up in Bay City that would be really hard to pull off in a 1,000-seat room like we have down in Saginaw. And so what I love about that is that it gives people options. And it lets them say that, because we have Bay City folks that attend down in Saginaw, and we have Saginaw folks that drive up to Bay City. And so all of it makes sense, and all of it kind of points to this kind of sweet spot, ideal size worship center of 250-ish seats. That's what all my buddies, executive pastors that I connect with from all over, that's what we talk about. That's what we're looking for, which puts you at that 20,000 square foot facility size as being ideal.
Well, and part of it is the context with our region too. I think I said this from up front, if not in another environment, that Bay City this fall is running about 175, which already makes them one of the biggest
churches in the region.
In the region, right? Yeah. So it really is, and the work that's happening there is tremendous. Anything else from that FAQ sheet?
From the FAQ sheet, folks wanted to know, the big change from what we put out in the survey to what we actually rolled in the campaign was we dropped paying off the Saginaw mortgage, and people just wanted to know the why for that, which I totally get. The short answer is because you told us that in the survey, right? That was the response of the congregation, was it would be super nice to do that, but we have an advantageous interest rate on that loan right now, and when we shrink the total number for the campaign ask, the way we did from $4 million down to 1.75, that meant that if we were going to pay off the Saginaw campus mortgage, that would be the only thing that we were going to be able to do. And so our monthly payment right now, which is a part of our general fund, is already budgeted, is not breaking the bank for us. We have a 3.7 interest rate on that loan.
Yeah.
So the feedback that we got from the congregation in the survey was, let's do these other things and let's stay the course with the mortgage that we have currently. And so that allowed us to come in where we did with the Bay City campus and the capital improvements in Saginaw being the primary drivers of the campaign.
Good.
So that was another question. A lot of folks asking about Share Hope.
Yeah.
Which is a thing, and I'll let you talk about this a little bit, but the short answer is with year-end giving and the campaign pledge process kind of bleeding over into the holidays, and we're acknowledging that Hopevale is incredibly generous at year-end every year, but this year people are going to be thinking, am I going to give to the general fund? Am I going to give to Share Hope? Am I going to start to give on my pledge to the campaign? We felt like this was a great season or opportunity to move Share Hope to the Easter season.
Yes.
And the amount of money in the Share Hope fund right now makes it a non-issue, because I've had a number of people, and I just would like to look at the camera and say this, I've had a number of people wonder if we're going to continue to be able to fund the efforts of Hopevallers to make a difference in our region and beyond. And the answer is yes. There's plenty of money there for that.
Those were actually some of my favorite conversations with the board this year, because everyone around that table really values, respects, and honors the spirit of that, and they recognize it's something that's very important to our church. Yeah. And so exactly what you said, and I think I said in one venue too, the COVID season was really interesting because it slowed down, right? The mobilization projects, for lack of a better word, right? So we did build up. So we still have a very healthy balance there, and yet we're able to do things, right? And we've helped with some missionary work in Ukraine this year, and we've helped with some local projects this year. So
and some disaster relief from the
that's right. Yeah. So that's exactly what that's for. And again, as we head toward the holidays, I know community groups and life groups will mobilize towards that and helping neighbors in need. And
and moving Share Hope to Easter does not mean that you can stop or should stop doing those things. There's plenty of funds for that. So just want you guys to hear that clearly.
Yeah. And, I think one of the things, because it started off way back in the day as the Christmas Eve offering, then the Christmas outreach offering, about when it's collected versus when it's spent. So it's spent throughout the year, right? And so that's it. And, I think the other thing too, we've had conversations for years on the board and the staff about what qualifies as outreach, right? And to be honest, these projects that are part of greater things, are about reaching people for Christ. So I'm going to travel in the time machine and say something. I remember when we were talking about building our Saginaw campus, and people were worried about directing funds towards a building as opposed to quote unquote ministry, right? And I think sometimes we create these false dichotomies, but the reality is it did give us a bigger platform, and it really has expanded not only our influence, but expanded the amount of people we have who are being generous. And so it's really been awesome to see, and I think that that's going to continue.
Yeah, I remember having a conversation with Chris Vincent, who was the voice of the campaign, 12 years ago or whatever, for Hopevale, and him telling me how that campaign and building the campus at Center in Tittabawassee took Hopevale from being a local church down the road towards becoming a regional church. Yeah. And then he told me that this next iteration, this next campaign, and Hopevale really leaning into a multi-site strategy, putting kind of beachfronts and ministry centers in all the locations throughout this region. In his words, he was talking about how we're going to really grow up into our role as a regional church and beyond. And there's legacy in that, and there's vision in that, and I can get really excited when I think about it in those kind of terms.
Yeah, because as we're seeing in Bay City, it really is a local church.
Yeah.
Right. And it's great talking with that team and talking about, Nate has talked about a greater sense of permanence and what that means for drawing people to that church, but then releasing a greater amount of energy for ministry, because we're coming up on 5 years, and they're doing the portable church thing every week, right? So
the only other comment or question that I've been getting more frequently, it showed up in that FAQ 2.0, was this question of, well, it's a cash flow question. What happens as the funds come in? What do we prioritize? And if we come in over or under the 1.75 million, what does that mean? What's going to happen? And the answer right now from the board has been really clear, and that we are not going to prioritize one project over the other. The nature of both of the big pieces of this project, which would be the Bay City building and the capital improvements in Saginaw, is that we can stair step those and kind of tier those as we go. So we should be able to manage cash flow and be able to move on both of those projects. And I keep telling people, I think the Lord's going to give us exactly what he's planning to give us and exactly what we need. I'm trying to picture God and Jesus up in heaven going, oh, okay, we thought that campaign, what happened? How did this happen? They came in at this number and that wasn't our plan. God and Jesus having that. They're not having that conversation. They got it. They got it through us. They got it.
Yeah.
So we're good.
Yeah. So maybe that really leads then kind of the where do we go from here? I want to talk both like campaign specifics, because even though we had the 13th, we're not done pledging, and there's going to be a number and all that. So I want to talk about that. Where do we go from here? Those details, and then just kind of on a more aspirational level. So, well, maybe I'll start.
Yeah.
The 13th was a big Sunday, but I think I said a couple weeks ago that we'll collect pledges for people who weren't able to be with us on the 13th during the offering portion, both in the 20th and 27th. And then I think we were talking with Amy Ryan, our Director of Finance and Operations, and we have people mailing them in and people doing it online, right?
Yeah, there's been a high percentage of folks digitally submitting their pledge, and so that's great. What we know statistically is about a third of our people were in church yesterday on the 13th. And so the options to continue to make those pledges will continue to be available for us going into December and into the holiday season. And so we're just going to continue to monitor that, and as all precincts report in, right, we'll update as we can and all that. So there will be a Sunday coming up in December where we make a bigger announcement just to let everybody know. I would assume, right?
Yes, yeah, and that's the question I was getting yesterday. The number.
Yeah.
Right now we have actually that first Sunday penciled in. That
first Sunday in December,
December 4th. Yeah. And we'll do that as part of the service, and I'll be joined by Bill Klein, who's our elder chair.
Yep.
And so, like you said, we're kind of tracking the numbers now, but realizing that while yesterday was a big day, it wasn't the only day. And, it was interesting too. I don't know if this is like a word picture or what. It's like after the service was over, I saw a few people come to the stage afterwards to like put in their pledge, and for whatever reason, maybe they were singing or praying or whatever. And I think that's kind of symbolic. I think there are other people who's just like, okay, I'm catching up a little bit or whatever. So yeah,
and I think there were some people who weren't there all 5 Sundays of the series, and so like I was really, really glad that you gave the option to write "Still Praying" on the card.
Yeah.
I that's a number that's going to be very interesting to me, is how many people responded with, hey, we're still praying through this thing, and we don't want to short circuit the Spirit's process, especially if for some people yesterday was the first Sunday that they maybe were there for the series, and that was a lot of information to take in and act on very quickly, and we want you to pray, and we want you to have healthy and appropriate process.
Yeah. So. I feel like this is part of the podcast, maybe as we kind of begin to wind things down, that's like the Academy Awards, where we start thanking everyone, even to this point, Paul, because, you've been on the front lines. You've put a lot of work into this, and we've had staff, we've had key volunteers and members of our elder board, all that written material, all the digital material just didn't kind of come out of nowhere, right?
Yeah, I would give a shout out to Pete Carlson and his team, Amber, who's on the board for this podcast. Hey, Amber, I see you over there. Pete's team, Bill Hobson and George Puya from the Elder Board, with a lot of the staff, like you said, the number of conversations. That was the biggest joy for me in the whole process, was going into homes and being a part of those conversations in people's homes. It really was a collaborative kind of leadership lift for all of us. And so I'm really proud of how things went, to be honest. I mean, I feel like Jesus used us in that process.
I know. I know. It really
So-
is. And again, just this spirit of kind of like honoring the Lord. So,
Yeah.
so last week's podcast, I kind of jotted this down because I wanted to carry this over. I think our closing questions are, what are you hearing? And we kind of talked about that. But the other question is, what are you hoping? So we're going to come to December. We're going to announce a number. And this is going to sound very pastory, Paul, but I'm going to say this anyways. It's like, the number is the number, and I want to know it as much as everyone else. But I think the Lord's work in people's lives in the church, right, again, has been the real gold in this. I mean, it really has, right? But okay, so what are you hoping for?
Yeah, so maybe this is less pastory. I'm hoping for 1.75 million pledged. When I was a kid, I remember being told by my Sunday school teacher, like in third grade, that heaven is going to be beyond your wildest dreams. So I would dream my wildest dreams, and like put it out there. So God had to clear that bar, kind of a deal.
Yeah.
So my prayer has been, and my hope is that that we would hit the 1.75, and that because I know enough about God to know that if we don't, that's His plan.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to apologize for asking for that. So that's like the first thing. Part of what I hope for is that more and more people who call Hopevale their church home, or people who would marginally say Hopevale is my church, like it's where I go on the holidays and that kind of thing, that more and more of those people would engage the process. Because I've seen such great like Holy Spirit stuff done in people's lives through the process. And so that would be my hope, is that we turn into 2023 and more people are coming to Hopevale, that more and more people would engage in the process. And then the third thing for me is that I hope our staff gets a break. Our staff's tired right now. And I was thinking the other day, well, in addition to a succession process and a capital campaign, what else did we have going on this fall? And so you hinted at the list, right? We had a fall groups launch. We had the women's event with Sarah Schreiber. We had the scene event for parents. We had trunk or treat. We had parent-child dedication. We had baptism services. We had student retreat. And this was that's the list that's the result of me telling the staff, hey, let's only do the mission critical things this fall so we can leave room for the search and succession process and the capital campaign. So my prayer is that our staff has a restful season where we can exhale a little bit, or get out of the passing lane a little bit and just drive in the right lane for a season. So those are my things.
That's really good. And again, without assuming everybody knows everything about your role, one of the things we say our executive pastor is chief of staff, and you do a great job at really monitoring the pulse of where the staff is at. And, in a normal year, fall ranks up as just one of the most
busy,
right? Yeah. And then we've layered two, what I would call almost generational kind of things, right? A succession process and a campaign.
Yeah.
And so I love your heart for that. And I think those are things we've talked about as a board as well. Not that we're going to stop ministry come 2023, right? But a recognition that there are rhythms and seasons.
And we're heading into the Christmas season, right? Now that the Greater Things teaching series is behind us, we've got a couple weeks here for Thanksgiving, and then we're launching into the Advent season and everything else. And so I would just look at the camera and tell Hopevalers, if you want to bake Christmas cookies for your favorite staff person and just give them to them and say, thank you for everything you've done this fall, I think they would appreciate that. And so I'm going to ask for that.
That's so good. Oh my gosh. There you go. Yeah. I do. Paul, again, I've been praying about that number as well, and God's work in us through that. And then I don't know, for some reason I've got this picture of a ribbon cutting ceremony in Bay City. And I don't know when it's going to happen and how it's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's not about the building, and yet it is about the church. And as we've seen, right, God uses those things as platforms for ministry of greater impact. And so I really do. And then I think really, the sustained just ministry impact of what's happening in Saginaw. And maybe we've talked about this on the podcast or not. I know some of the things that have been talking about in addition to all the worship and main auditorium upgrades, or some of maybe the changes even around the kids area and the coffee area of just opening that up, making it more secure and more inviting. And I've heard you and Sam and Jody and some of our other staff talk about that. I'm like, yes, love that, right? And again, it's this generational impact of the Lord working in Hopevale.
Nate uses this phrase, we want to continually reimagine how we're going to share Jesus with the people of the Great Lakes Bay region. And I love that. I want us to never be stuck. I want us to always be improving. I want us to always be asking the Lord what we can be doing differently. And I want us to always be inviting more and more people into the journey, figuring out where it is that they've been sent and what part it is that the Lord wants them to play at Hopevale. So
yeah, so good. Okay, well, there we go. And again, so grateful for you guys being a part of this church, for tuning in, for believing in a God who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine. So peek into next week. Next week is kind of a bridge week from the campaign to Christmas, and it's just a Sunday that we're calling Give Thanks. It's going to be a communion Sunday. We're going to have a lot of worship. Nate's got a message for Bay City. I'll have a message for Saginaw. We'll also we'll share communion together. We'll have extended times of worship, and we're also going to have another search update. And so I understand that there's more news coming out of that process. So yeah,
that was a massive teaser by you, right?
Oh, totally. Right. Be in church. Right. Yeah. Elaine Carls, Randy Swartz, and that entire team has been working really hard, praying really hard, because this is another thing that's happening.
And it's another place where the Holy Spirit is clearly showing up.
Yeah.
So
good. And then there are also whisperings of a podcast takeover next Monday. Yes. Yeah. So I think our media team is crashing the scene next week, and we'll talk just about what's going on in the church, talk about Give Thanks Sunday and whatever else. So looking forward to that.
That's good. Awesome.
Yeah. Well, Paul, thanks for being a part of things, and we want to thank you for listening and watching today. And as always, we invite you to join us again next time when we take a deeper dive.
Thank you for watching the Deeper Dive video podcast. To check out our full library, make sure to subscribe by clicking the button below. Also, make sure to select the bell icon in order to be notified of any new content as it is posted. If you would like to give to the Lord here at Hopevale and support the ministry, you can give by visiting hopevale.org/give. Thank you again for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you and your family at Hopevale.